my name is Oliver. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP from Germany. I'm leading the German data monster, so to say. So that's our little symbol. So we have not a dragon, but a monster in Germany. But honestly, I really like the dragon. I really like this kind of visuals of SQL bits. I'm running a company. We are a Microsoft partner. We are doing also software. We have a booth there. But this is not the topic today. I'm with my... You are running the chapter in the Ruhrgebiet, so it's another data monster from Germany, a former data platform MVP.
Yep. And now a member of the Power BI Customer Advisory team since a little bit over a year now. Actually, last year at SQL Bits, it was my second week on the PBI CAD team. So it really is a little bit more than a week now. And I'm actually a former employee of Oliver's, but still a friend. So.
Still a friend, still a friend.
So we're happy to be here.
But now she can complain, you know. Now she can really say, hey, you have to... You have to speak faster, and it's my slot now.
Let's be honest, whoever knows me, I did complain before as well.
That's
so
true.
I'm a typical German, whoever saw Power.
That's true. So what do we have today for you is, we look a little bit into the topic of governance, and especially we want to look from a perspective of Power BI to it. Yeah? So that's one of the things that we have in mind. And for that, we just pick a kind of additional tool that supports Power BI in this kind of challenge of governance, which is Microsoft Purview. We don't do a big introduction into Purview. We just look at Purview from the perspective of Power BI, what's in it and what's useful for Power BI, and especially how you can connect these both together. And as Purview is not just the data catalog as such, we also have some additional stuff going on with risk and compliance management. And that's, let's say, the whole thing that we are doing. From a timing perspective, if we most of the time talk a lot, we would like if you can raise the questions over the app. We can do them later on. Maybe we have time if I'm not speaking too much. And also for the online people, just throw it in and then we come back because we also have access to the app and try to answer all the questions. And as I have a person from Microsoft with me, I can say, hey, Gavi, what is the answer to that question? What is the vendor saying about this kind of functionality, if it's working or not?
And so, as I have been completely Microsoft brainwashed, I know all the diplomatic and political answers that they need.
And I can tell you, this happened just a month ago when she was with Microsoft. She already got brainwashed and already got this kind of sentence in her mind, how to answer questions where I was annoyed about a functionality. Anyhow, let's go. So, Power BI needs governance. I think this is something that I think all of you will say, yes, of course, we want to do some kind of governance because now Power BI is growing. We do Power BI for, I don't know, since Data Explorer from the Microsoft research team, and it didn't call Power Query at that time, so a long time. And we saw over the time that Power BI gets bigger and bigger and bigger, gets also a lot of big companies, enterprises using Power BI, and thousands of people have to be managed working with data in a self-service fashion. So the main purpose of this is then to say, okay, how can we enable these people to work with something like Power BI on their data? So this kind of screen is, the graphic is from the Power BI adoption roadmap, which I can really recommend for people to read. It's really all these boxes you see here on the left side are documentation, tips, tricks, how to implement that. Maybe it's a little bit too much for people, but if you are searching for something, for some kind of guidance, how to implement Power BI in a best practice in your enterprise, I really have to recommend that. It's really cool. What we would like to take out of this kind of graphic is the point 6, the governance. And there I just took over one of the descriptions in the text, and it says, and that's something I really like, empower the user community to the greatest extent possible while adhering to industry governmental, constructural or requirements and regulations. Now it looks a little bit complicated, but the intention is to say, empower the user community. Though it doesn't mean that governance means, hey, you have to restrict people doing things. You just have to guide people, and you just have to support people, and you have to take care that people going to the right direction and don't doing silly things. Yeah? But it is the intention, and that's the most important thing, to empower the people to work with. And that's also one of the big habits of Power BI and one of the success factors of Power BI, that you have something that empowers people to do their own reports, to play with data, etc., etc. So this is the main goal. And also, when we look at it, yeah, it's when we are working with customers, it's really the most important thing to say, hey, always reflect any kind of technology, any kind of process you set up. Does it restrict people of doing things in Power BI, or does it empower people? And that's something just to have in your mind if you do something with, especially with Power BI.
And I think one thing that is very often neglected is that we are seeing terms like securing access, restricting access, securing data is very often perceived as kind of negative, like we are preventing people from doing something, we're limiting people. But it can also be seen as a different, from a different angle. We actually manage to create a secure space where people can work without being afraid that they can do something wrong pretty easily. We are empowering people by making sure that they can try out what is there without having the fear in mind that they might involuntarily share to somebody, use data that they are not allowed to see, and actually break any rules that there are. And there are people who don't care, true, that's always the case, but there are a lot of people who are really concerned not to do anything wrong, not to violate company rules. And by security and governance, we can actually manage to create that secure space where people can actually work and try and collaborate without being afraid of breaking rules or violating regulations easily.
Exactly. What you see here on that slide is from datagovernance.com. It's a kind of goals of what should be in a governance program, especially for data. And of course, you know all these kind of points. They are natural for all of us working with data together, saying, hey, enable better decision making. Yes, of course. All of these things are relevant. And one of the points is that, and most of the time it's something like where you say, governance, this is not such a nice topic. And if you look, for example, from a Microsoft perspective, the governance part comes quite late into the product. So it was much easier to have this kind of 5 minutes to wow, to have a nice graphic. But as soon as you go into some kind of organizations and you need to have these kind of processes, you need some kind of data governance functions, because it's not just, of course, from an empowerment, that's correct, but also there is, for example, this point, reduce costs and increase effectiveness. Yes, empowerment on the one side is increasing the possibilities of people working with data, but also this has to be related to a certain kind of cost and a certain kind of efficiency that people who are working with the data. And all of that part is part of data governance that we have in there. Now, all this is nice, but if you are looking into something like you have Power BI going on in your company, there are different ways of implementing this kind of governance functionality. Most of the time, from our perspective, it's like the scenario at the top where you just say, hey, let's roll out Power BI. Here we go. And everybody is happy. We have a report now, and our management is happy. 5 minutes to wow, Microsoft is happy.
One employee starts by finding this Power BI desktop thingy somewhere and starting
this
to explore.
kind of guerrilla marketing
Did you
stuff.
know that? And suddenly IT department says like, well, we have this kind of IT analysis thing next to our standard process. How do we rule that? And if people already got the opportunity to test out all those possibilities, it might be hard to tell them they shouldn't use them.
Now you see she's from Microsoft, huh? Yeah. So this kind of thing, but it's really true. It's like you have this kind of let's say momentum to get Power BI rolling out. It's quite easy to do that, yeah. And then you look into it and see it from a governance perspective. There are some businesses, maybe businesses who already have some kind of BI solutions in place, where you have the different way, where they say, hey, we maybe have to, let's say, remove our old reporting system on SQL Server, and now we are going to the cloud. And of course, yeah, we use a product from Microsoft. Now we heard of Power BI, let's start with this. And then the guys from the internal IT or from the corporate IT say, hey, attention, we need to have first a plan to do this. So we need some kind of governance, how to see that. So this is also some of the scenario that could happen when you run with governance in your company. Honestly speaking, I don't see it so much as a scenario.
We see it pretty often with FSI customers, for example.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you have financial institutes, if you have like, that is something, they are pretty restrictive on what people are allowed. Yeah. In a lot of other branches or it's way more easy, but it really depends on how your company is set up on working with data from the start.
Yeah, and the last one is this kind of mixture. So it's kind of iterative process where you say, hey, I'm working with something like Power BI. Now I have some new reports. I set up some kind of rules in terms of security. I'm looking at any kind of data quality, functionality, etc. And this goes step by step in a kind of learning process. If we look at the challenges itself, you can divide these challenges a little bit into we put that into 5 pillars, and these are also in this document of best practices of the adoption roadmap. So the first one is strategy, and strategy is always a point that you have to debate and you have to set up with your management. So if there is not a kind of data culture thinking in your enterprise, it's sometimes quite hard to get budget to implement some kind of data governance functionality, because the management says, hey, we have more important things to do. We need to get these reports out. I don't care. If there's any kind of data quality problem, just make it going. And then you have to see how to get this done. Yeah. You are laughing.
Yeah, it's the typical, don't tell me there's a problem, just solve it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's also the maturity level of analytics. So how is your company set up from their mindset, how they work with data? That's one. On the other side, of course, it's related to people. Yeah? So on the one side, maybe you're completely new to Power BI. There is no expertise. They don't know how Power BI works in the background. Even Power BI is self-service, and even the vendor says, hey, everything is easy. I think we can all agree it's not that easy as it seems. So this is also something that will tackle you into this kind of challenges when you go in. What we see as well, I don't go into every detail of these points, but one of the things that I really see in a lot of projects that we have is the point with duplicate efforts. Because The way how Power BI works and let's say, the more team-oriented approach of Power BI with the workspaces and so on is like that you have teams that are using Power BI and they find their own way how to deal with rights management of their workspace, the way how they deal with bad data quality, the way how they deal with central data sources like their SAP system or something like this. But then another team does exactly the same thing. And there's no coordination. There's maybe some idea of, hey, let's do a Power BI community in our company. We have a Teams channel where we chat about Power BI problems. That's already some of these steps. That's already some of the ideas that is also in the adoption process. But it is not something like a governance rule set, an idea how to tackle that. And therefore, you need people who are a little bit on a different level, maybe in a different area in the matrix organization that can help these teams to streamline and to reduce the duplication of processes.
Yeah, and that actually fits perfectly in what Oliver said in the beginning. Like, we are talking about Power BI and Purview together here. So Power BI is our example for governance. But actually, you could also say we can remove the Power BI from here. It's actually more about data governance culture. Because this duplication of effort, this governance concepts, this thinking in a governance cultural way is not something which is only related to Power BI, although it is important there, but it only makes sense, or it has the best impact if you're thinking this on the full data landscape of your organization, because you will have the same efforts in your warehousing. If you have a multi-vendor strategy on analysis, you will see the same questions, the same issues in all your other data products and data tools. So actually governance is an umbrella that is spanning above all your data governance or all your data estate. But we are focusing on Power BI now, but this can be transferred to all your other data artifacts, data tools as well.
Yeah. Now, if you look a little bit more into this kind of challenges, you see as well processes, and you see things like missing privacy and security regulations. That's, of course, something that is a little bit more into the governance point that a lot of people who are working in teams and so on maybe don't have the mindset to do this, where you do it from a central space. On the other side, you have data quality and data management things like, for example, something like, hey, you have 10 times your SAP data source in there, and everybody is doing it different, and everybody has different needs to it. Some data is incorrect. You don't know where this data is coming from and where it is used, and nobody understands really the impact if you have a change in a certain data source across your organization. Nobody really has a function of an ownership or a stewardship of that kind of data set. Yeah? These are things that, of course, people will immediately notice, even they are spread in teams and working in their workspaces. But from our experience, this is something that pops up immediately if you're getting bigger and bigger with Power BI and working more with that. So that means in the end, there's also this part down on the right side, skill and data literacy, where you have also the point that the whole environment gets too complex and the people don't really have the ability to manage all these kind of different assets and have the ability to understand what's in there. So with these challenges, Microsoft has introduced a product called Purview some years ago. At that time, it called Azure Purview. Before, there was another attempt to do this, and that was the Azure Data Catalog. And at that time, as it called Azure Purview, Microsoft had this kind of functionality that we have data governance functions for it. So the product Azure Purview was for the data governance functions. Now, with the renaming of it to Microsoft Purview, all the other stuff came in, correct? Is it correct?
It's not necessarily.
From a vendor perspective?
Well, to be honest, Microsoft Purview is not the renaming of Azure Purview. Microsoft Purview is, again, like an umbrella term, and Azure Purview got integrated into Microsoft Purview and got renamed as well, something we will see on the next slide. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. Microsoft Purview is an umbrella. It contains several technologies that have been there before, and it spans everything currently available in Azure that we see as important functionalities, important features to help you govern your data estate.
Okay. And on the other side, you have this kind of risk and compliance
well, but
part.
that's also Microsoft Purview. That's also something which has been there before. Now everything is covered under Microsoft Purview, but we definitely have those two aspects still available. And we have two different portals for that currently, just right now. It's a historical way of growing. Let's see what the future brings. But at the moment, we have two different aspects, two different portals. And in general, we very often have different teams working at the customers, especially at large customers, on different aspects. So that still might make sense.
Okay, so let's have a look into the governance portal first. So in the governance portal, if you see
quick intro, yeah, exactly. Yeah. We on the right side, what you see will the product names before Microsoft Purview was brought into the game and the new ones, and there you see the Azure Purview is it's renamed to Microsoft Purview, but all the other things were renamed as well. So.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of marketing stuff going on, but what I would like to say is, what are the possibilities of Purview from the governance portal with regards to Power BI. So what we have here, and I will go through that quite quickly as we don't do any kind of introduction into Purview. We have a data catalog here. We have data sharing, data insights, and data policies. So let's have a look what this is all about. So first of all, we have this kind of nice map so that you can see what in your landscape, what kind of data sources are in there, how you structure that. We have the concept of collections where you can add security to it and where you can see what kind of data sources are underneath the collections. On the other side, we have the data catalog itself that gives you the possibility to browse through to search to your assets and see what kind of elements do you have in your data landscape. And there it could be also the Power BI assets like a report, like a data set, et cetera, et cetera. I will show that later on. You see here on this part, when you go a little bit deeper into the asset itself, you will see things like there's some kind of metadata information. So for example, what kind of schema do we have? What kind of users do we have? Any kind of data classification is available. And you see exactly how this works in the hierarchy itself. And then you have stuff like, for example, lineage, where you can see especially where these data sources you have, where they are coming from. Maybe you have a report and you want to understand, okay, this report is fed by this kind of data set, is fed by this kind of data source, by this kind of OLTP system or whatever. So it's quite comprehensive in the way how you can navigate. And that's something I want to show you in a sec. We will have additional things, like, for example, a business glossary that gives you the possibility to say, if you are somebody who is not technically aware what these kind of data sets are all in, you can have some kind of translation into business terms so that you see, okay, this KNA1 table is the customer table of SAP or something like this. Yeah. In addition, you get also some kind of insight. So you see exactly how your data is structured and how much of the data is set up in your data catalog itself. In addition to that, Microsoft adds more and more features to the governance portal. And here we are seeing things like data sharing, where you can share data between people, so you can allow people over the portal to get access or to retrieve the data from a certain kind of place. And you also have the possibility via policies to allow people to connect to a system and to give them access to it. And this by a workflow where somebody else can approve this. So you have some kind of 4i principle things going on. And that's quite massive, but we do not want to get into that because that's even a session worth. All right, how's it set up? And this is something we have to understand. Microsoft Purview is an Azure service. It runs as a platform as a service on Azure. And you have the possibility to connect to different data sources, to scan them, so to see exactly what's in there. You are connected to the Azure Active Directory, so anything with users, with security groups, is something you can leverage in Purview itself. When you work with Purview, one of the things that tackles us in projects is a lot, how do you set up this kind of Purview system? Is it something you set up completely for your company, or is it something you set up for different teams, etc.? The best practice is really to have that on top level of your company and then regulate that by collections. It's also quite interesting, and it gets into the nitty-gritty if you talk about network connections, because you can set up this kind of Microsoft Purview in private mode. So that means that nobody from outside can connect to it, but that means as well you have to have some kind of ideas how to scan other sources. So there is a concept of self-hosted integration runtimes. Maybe you know that from Azure Data Factory. When we talk about this kind of network architecture, why is it important? Because, for example, Power BI is something that you can have public. You can also lock that down. But when you want to use Microsoft Purview with Power BI, you really have to understand, okay, in what kind of environment, in what kind of network your Purview is, and how you can access the Power BI area. I have some kind of links here how to what you need in terms of implementing Purview, because it's also not that easy. It's not this kind of click-through installation. You need some kind of special resources, and especially if you just want to try it out, it is quite pricey because there's a lot of infrastructure behind that. There's a great blog post just coming out from our friend Wolfgang that does it on a minimal cost base, but you can only do some kind of small things. So check it out on his blog when you try to work with Purview. Now, how can we connect Purview to Power BI? And there's a main difference to anything that you normally have with Purview when you, for example, connect to Azure SQL DB. You can do that one-on-one. With Purview and Power BI, this only works on tenant level. That means if you want to scan something from Purview, you always have to scan the whole tenant. So you can decide if you want to have your private workspaces, you want to scan as well. But the main point is, if you do that, you scan the whole tenant. So every workspace that is existing in your tenant will be scanned. And that's something that is already a debate when you work in these kind of projects, that maybe some of the departments say, no, we don't want to have our workspaces scanned by Purview. That's something you have to deal and you have to understand in your project. On the other side, what's quite cool, you can use this with your managed identity of Purview that helps you from a security perspective, and there is a setting in the tenant setting of Power BI where you just add this managed identity, and by that, Purview will do that in the background. Now, when you do a scan, it's something that you can say, hey, I want to scan this kind of tenant. And what Purview is doing there is it takes together all the different assets that you have. So you have dashboards, reports, data sets, data flow, data marts. All of that stuff will be scanned. And the cool thing about the lineage here, and I just jump into the Purview itself. So you see that's the portal of Purview. And if you want to search for something like you have in your Power BI system, you search, for example, for something like lineage or something like this, then you have the possibility to, hopefully if the network works, come on, here we go. You see all the different elements that you just have set up, but you also see on this side that you have the possibility to select. So for example, if I'm just interested in databases or in reports, I can go into this. And I see as well all the different information about the Power BI data set.
It's a quick information. At the moment, it's only possible to scan the full Power BI tenant.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, exactly.
And just to highlight that.
Exactly. And for example, you get things like, it's a little bit blurry, you get things like, for example, the schema of your data set. So everything will be extracted. Here, just an information if you wonder, for example, if you got stuff in your Power BI tenant that was published, let's say 3, 4, 5 months ago, sometimes you don't get this kind of schema information. You have to republish it because there is some kind of missing functionality with regards to retrieving in a scan all that kind of schema. What I want to show you is the lineage, because that's quite an interesting thing, because if you compare lineage on Power BI side, so if you go into Power BI and you look at the same thing on a lineage perspective, what you see is, of course, you see the lineage internally in Power BI, but you see only that it is connected to a SQL server. With Purview, you have the possibility to go a little bit deeper, because you see exactly what are the data sources that are connected to that data set. Yeah? And in addition, you can also say, hey, just show me as well all the attributes that are in there, so I can see exactly what kind of fields are in there. So from a governance perspective, this is a quite cool functionality for people who are working with Power BI and connecting to the systems, because they can see all the downsides of the whole information that is available in the dashboard, in the report, in the data set, and then going down into Synapse, into Azure SQL. Why, I have to say, this functionality of having these attributes only currently works with Azure SQL DB and unfortunately not with Synapse, but this will come, I would say.
We're constantly improving.
Good. So with this, we have a look into some more stuff that works with Purview.
Yeah, so we already talked about 2 different aspects of governance. We talked about 2 different portals. So what we will do now, we will talk about the compliance aspect of all of that. So having the information about what is actually available in your tenant is the observability aspect is really important to make that, well, just to actually set the baseline, because if you don't know which data is available in your tenant, first, your users don't know how to get access to that data, which data is available, what to work with. But also, your governance team cannot work on that because, well, of course, you can prevent data from getting into your tenant, but if it's already there, you want to know that, you want to see that. But if you have the knowledge about what is there, you also want to work with that knowledge. And the topics we will quickly talk about now is the part of data loss prevention and information protection. And all of that can actually be managed in the compliance portal. And the compliance portal is something which is part of the M365 aspect. And I opened up too many windows. Just give me a sec. No, that's not the one. There we go. So you're used to this part of M365 overview, and you can still find the compliance portal there. So it's actually part of the apps that are available in M365. Of course, you need very specific permission to enter that portal, and you can find all the additional topics like information protection or data loss prevention as part of this portal. You can, and that is something which is sometimes a conflict from a Power BI administrative perspective, because, like I said, this is really, really very, very restricted access here. This is really high privilege that you need to get here, and that's generally managed by the M365 admin and governance team. So all the definitions, how governance should work, the information protection labels we will talk about, the data loss prevention policies we will see just right now, all of this is actually configured inside the compliance portal. So what you can do as a Power BI administrator is you can set, should that be used? Should that be used on certain workspaces, or by which should that be used? Who is allowed to change assignments? But you don't have any kind of influence, and to be honest, not very much insight into what is actually defined inside that compliance portal. And that is something which is really important to understand, and that is something where this data governance cultural thinking also means improving the collaboration between those two teams, to drive the knowledge transfer, to help the Power BI administrators understand what a certain information protection label will actually do to your Power BI files, because they don't have the insight. And transparency is very important here to actually help building the trust that what you're doing there is the right way to do, and it's really important. Yeah. And that is something where Microsoft is not maybe we can improve in making this transparency work better for companies. So that's something which is actually an organizational and collaborative aspect that companies need to be aware of and need to foster themselves inside their company.
But I think one thing is quite important, when what we had at the start with this kind of empowerment of people. I think one thing that drives Microsoft is as well to say, hey, we have these kind of regulation functions, but we still try to empower the people to use Power BI and make it easy to use that.
Yep.
And I think this is something we can see in information protection quite well.
Absolutely. And information protection is based on something that starts at the data estate, which is the classification of data. So before you can start with information protection, you need to know what data is there, and you need to classify the data. You need to know which data is personal identifiable data, for example. So what is data that needs protecting? What is data that can be shared with everybody? This kind of classification comes first. And based on this classification, you need to actually work on how to restrict this. And that is done with labels. Labels are generally designed to come in a hierarchical manner. In Power BI, you can only use the root labels. You cannot use the node versions of a label. And what a label actually does is you can define a scope. A scope actually means, or let us look into an existing label to make this a little bit easier. So if we're looking at highly confidential all employees, for example, you can define a scope, which means you can tell if that label should work on items like files, like emails, if it should work on certain groups, and if it should work on schematized data assets, which would be, for example, databases, tables, things like this in your data estate. That is something that came pretty recently, because data classification before in SQL Server worked with SQL information protection labels, or data types, and now you can also use the general Microsoft information protection data types and labels. So this is coming together as well, and this is helping to actually build the end-to-end layer.
We take that question later. Is it okay? Good.
Sorry. And I will be, both of us will be here for the rest of the day if we don't manage during that. Another important part is you can decide what happens. And one of the actions that you can do is you can enforce encryption on the files, for example. And that is something which is important, especially when thinking about Power BI, because you can also enforce encryption on the PBIX files. So if a PBIX file gets downloaded from the service and it has a label assigned that actually enforces encryption, only the creator of that or somebody with high privilege permissions on the label can actually edit that PBIX file. So that is something which is also working on PBIX. And just to finish this, there are more of those settings. What you can do with the labels is you can actually assign the labels to your data sources, Excel file, SQL, and if you create your data sources, your data sets on top of those defined data sources, the data sets will inherit the labels from those data sources. Same can be configured and can be done inside Power BI. So when you're creating a report on top of a labeled data set, that report will actually inherit that label. And it goes even further. Even when you're exporting to specifically to Office files or PDF, those labels will be inherited down, even down to those exports. So if you're exporting from Excel, or if you're using Analyze in Excel, those labels will be actually assigned to the Excel files as well. And that's an important aspect. And that was the downstream inheritance we were talking about. As I said, this is also now available for SQL data sources. And in respect of the time, I quickly want to talk about data loss prevention, because that is something which is currently in preview. And as you could see in the roadmap, that is something which should land in GA pretty soon. So if that is something which is interesting for you, I would really recommend to look into this. Data loss prevention goes a little bit further than, because what you would need right now is you would classify your data, well, let's say half manually, half automatic. With the scan, you can actually apply classification automatically to your data estate. And if data is classified, then this classification can be inherited. But there's a lot of data sources that cannot be classified automatically yet. So when you're starting in Power BI, you need to be aware of this kind of classification. You need to be aware of this. And data loss prevention can help you close gaps on that, because you can define data loss prevention policies, and you can say, search my Power BI content for certain data types, for certain sensitive data types. And if you find them, do something, alert somebody, or data loss prevention policies allow also to perform certain actions. So you could assign a label. That is something which is currently not supported in Power BI, but this is something which is in Purview. And that is also something which we think is really important to understand. Purview is providing the general functionality to rule that. And all the different services, and Power BI is one of them, have now the opportunity to actually make use of those functionality. This means additional implementation work in all those services. It doesn't come for free, but we have to have the functionality in Purview first, and then the other services can make use of this. So we have that functionality to actually react based on the scanning, based on the identification, and an alert is already a very good thing to be seen first. You can also define DLP rules on sensitivity labels. So with this inheritance in combination with DLP, you can, for example, set up rules that will alert your administrator or specific people via an M365 alert, via email. Yeah, you can choose different things. If somebody is uploading a data set or content that actually has a certain specific sensitivity label assigned. And by this, you can actually get kind of notification. You can monitor how sensitive data is actually used or is actually added to your Power BI tenant. And that is something where we want to show a quick demo. And let me start that. That's pre-recorded because it takes some time for some of the policies to actually function after you set them new. This is currently in preview, so that is why you cannot assign those policies to Power BI and the existing locations. You can only assign it to Power BI, and you cannot make use of the template. So you create a custom template for Power BI, define a rule, decide if you want to have an info type or a label. Then you can assign the info types or the labels that this rule should actually work on. And when you have set up this rule, you can actually define how to do that. You can set up user notifications, which will appear as an info logo on the uploaded content. And you can actually you can change the policy tip that is shown there to actually make this transparent for the users and add, for example, an email address to have them ask for more information. And you can set up admin alerts here as well. So this is actually something which can help you and protect your tenant in a better way, but also share that knowledge, make this transparency available, educate your users by, for example, having those kind of policy tips. And this is what I meant. Now you can get this information. You can get more information on the detailed label. You will have addresses. You can also put a link to a knowledge base or an information site in that. And so that is something which we really see as a good opportunity to close some of the gaps that need a lot of manual effort just right now. And yeah, that's actually everything I wanted to show you on DLP. So we actually still have 3 minutes left for Q&A, or 2 minutes, sorry, 2 minutes left for Q&A. So we can get your question, sir. The question was, for this PII data, for example, or if you run a scan for this kind of sensitive information types, is that scan actually run on the full tenant or just on the uploaded content? And that is something which is currently investigated. So at the moment, this is run, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not 100% sure, but I want to check this up. If I'm not mistaken, the DLP policies is run on the full tenant. And this is something which, well, might make sense to reduce to what is actually just uploaded. But this is a really relatively new feature in Power BI. And that feedback is immensely valuable. So if you're interested in that, we are actually collecting actively feedback on that. And if you would want to play around with that, please feel free to contact me and let me know if that works for you. Or like you said, what would be the things you're missing out or you're actually would prefer, which would improve that experience to you. Yeah.
Also, does it manage scanning the whole tenant? And we're able to tell what we have PII data. So for example, if we're scanning the whole tenant, we have 3,000 reports, or we have 100 reports that they have PII
Yes.
data.
I didn't show that to you. That is something which especially also, so we have that on the portal on the one side, on the governance portal on the one side as part of the data catalog where you can see it. But we also have activities inside the compliant portal where you can actually see all those activities, what is happening, what is uploaded. And especially for the sensitivity labels, we have an information map that actually allows you to see what is connected where. Also, in addition, I would like to point out the scanner API. So we are offering API support for a lot of this already. So for example, you can use APIs to automatically assign sensitivity labels. But the scanner API is also the best way to actually get you a full picture of your tenant as well. And for example, information about assigned sensitivity labels and things like this is also available as part of the scanner API. So we're working on improving that picture. It's a little bit patched just right now, but we're working on closing the gaps. But there is definitely possibilities to actually get this picture and see that. Yes. No, the scanner API is just scanning what is assigned currently now. If you want to see if there is PII data, that would be the scan that you would actually do with in part of the compliance portal, that scan that Oliver talked about. Yeah.
Maybe we can just...
let's take it offline because we're at time.
Exactly. And there's another German who wants to speak, and we have to make room for him. Hi, Frank. So thank you
everyone.
for your audience.
And we are happy about feedback.
Yeah, we're happy about feedback, and we will be available over there.